Hi. For those of you who already have joined and are watching me, can you tell me if you can hear me? Can you write down a comment if you can hear me? Great. So while we're waiting for the others to join, because we still have like 4 or 5 minutes to go, maybe if some of you are up to it, you can maybe message how are you doing during the crisis, and is everything okay with you guys, and how are you feeling? I think probably most of you are in Latvia, so maybe some of you aren't. So maybe you can tell where you're from and how's it going generally. Yeah, I feel you. I have the same thing now with university, being online and everything. I feel like this is the time to use it either, to kind of relax if you've had a very busy semester or past few months, or it's a time, to learn new hobbies and do stuff that you actually want to do instead of doing what is kind of imposed on you by school or by university. I get you. Well, I think we can probably start, and then maybe if more people will want to join, then they will join. So I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Maija. I am from Latvia, but I chose to do this workshop lecture in English because, most of you also debate in English. So I've thought that this is going to be more useful than to do it in Latvian. And I study in the Netherlands, and currently I am also in the Netherlands. I decided to stay here during this whole situation. Yeah, so that's about me. My debating career, I guess, is that I started debating, like really debating. I started in high school, and I started, with the Karl Popper style, and then I went to world schools. I learned about world schools really only when we were selected for the national team to go to the world championships, and I was a part of that team. And then I went to university, so I'm in my second year of university, and in my first year of university, I joined the debating association union here at Tilburg University. And so I went to different kind of regional and national competitions here in the Netherlands, and also 2 teams. I was in one of those teams. Two teams went to the European University Debating Championships as well. So I've had kind of experience in multiple debating styles. This year, I haven't done as much debating as I would like, but things happen, and and that's how it goes. Okay, so I think I'll start with the lecture. So today I'm going to talk more about specifically the style criteria in World Schools debates, and then throughout that and throughout kind of the factors that are taken into the style criteria, I will also talk about the most common mistakes that generally either young debaters or even more experienced debaters make. And those mistakes and those comments mostly come from my own experience and from what I've seen other debaters do in competitions and what generally judges have talked about when they give their feedback after a round. So, okay. So style criteria is one of the 3 main criteria that is generally taken into account when, giving points and judging a debate. So style criteria has a way of 40 points out of the maximum 100. So content has the other 40, and then strategy has 20. So elements that generally judges take into account is eye contact, gestures, speed, stance, clarity of language, and voice modulation. And throughout the lecture, we will go through all of them. So generally, to give you an understanding of what is more a bad style, an average or good style, and then a really excellent style. So very bad style actually takes away from the content. So the style is such that it interferes with the substance and with the analysis and arguments that you are trying to convey to the judges, to the audience, to your opponents. So it is so bad that it actually takes away the ability for judges to fully follow you, to understand you, and to follow then your line of thinking. And then you can see, like, if you have very bad style, then you will also have very low points on content and on strategy, just because all of those things are, of course, connected. And because if you have bad style, then it will not be easy or it will be very, very difficult for judges to catch your important points of analysis and your arguments. Then average style is something that you usually see in debaters that have, debated for like 6 months, maybe to a year. Of course, it varies on how much, previous experience in public speaking the person has had, or maybe they have a natural, talent for it. But so the average style is usually in those kind of debaters. And this type of style really doesn't add much to the content. So it doesn't really, for example, if you are placing an argument or a piece of analysis, then the style, the way how you do it, your tone, your speed, your volume, the language that you use doesn't really add anything to the content, but it doesn't, in the same way, it doesn't also take anything away from that content. So it kind of rounds up to a 0. So it doesn't take anything, but it doesn't add anything. And that's kind of the average type of style that you would get. And then excellent style. Well, that kind of style, which is really, truly excellent, I've only seen in debaters, in the top debaters who have debated, in the world championships for world schools. And that kind of style, it truly brings the content, the analysis, the arguments, it brings it kind of all together, and it makes it a lot more impactful because the voice that is used, the choice of words, the analogies that are used, this kind of the humor even that is used, or the emotion or anger that is used in these arguments, in your line of analysis, really truly impacts how it is, the strength of it and the quality of it, and then how judges will base that argument, that analysis, and then the debate together. So that is, excellent style. But I have to be fair that most debaters don't really reach that level, and that's completely fine, because, only a few debaters can really be the top debaters in the world. Okay, so let's move on to the factors that are taken into the style criteria when judges generally, judge the debate and allocate points. So eye contact. You've probably all heard about eye contact throughout, your trainings, your training sessions, and maybe from judges. So one of the biggest mistakes that young debaters especially do is that they read through their notes rather than from them. So for example, you take a piece of paper, especially if you don't have cue cards, the small ones, then if you take a piece of paper and you just read from it, and you can barely see your face, or you can only see, this part of your, the judges can only see this part of your eyes, and all you do is really read from the text and then place your line of analysis and your arguments, and all you do is just read from the text. What you want to do instead is, of course, you can't learn everything by heart, and it's really not necessary, and you don't have the time to do so. So instead, you choose to look at the text, and then you choose to look at the judges and continue, for example, with your example or with your analysis, or even, for example, counting the arguments that you've had. But then you look back at the paper just to see, okay, what is the next line or the next piece that I want to bring, and then you look up again. And of course, all of this sounds very, very basic, but the thing is that a lot of, especially young debaters in the beginning, they don't notice it themselves, that the moment when, instead of talking to the judges in the audience, they start reading from their own notes. So what I would suggest, and what I found also a bit difficult in the very beginning, is that you should use bullet points. I didn't like bullet points because I thought, like, I have, all these ideas, or I want to, add this and this. And I thought about it during the prep or during the debate itself. And I thought that, with bullet points, I might forget like an important piece of, information or something. But the thing is that with bullet points or with keywords, you won't really forget it. And you also will be more engaged with the audience and with your judges. And the flow is going to be much more natural. And so the eye contact will just naturally be there, because if you write the whole, all of your speech on a paper, then it's just going to come out as kind of just reading from it, and that also just makes it less convincing. Then what a lot of debaters do, also when they're nervous, for example, or it's a topic that they're not that convinced about their speech, and it's a topic that maybe they don't know really well, is that they flicker their eyes. So they know about the whole thing about eye contact, and they want to maintain eye contact, but the way they go about it does not come off convincing at all, because what they do is that they raise their head from their notes like this, and they read, and then for a split second they just choose to like look at the judges, but they don't really even look at the judges, and it just comes off as if you're just nodding, and that's something that you really don't want to do. Then also, I would suggest that you mainly look at the judges and at the audience instead of the opponents. I've seen that quite a few debaters look at their opponents when they're presenting, when they're doing rebuttal, especially. But the thing is that if you do rebuttal and you look at your opponents, you're not going to convince them otherwise. You're not going to convince them that you're right. And it's not your job to convince your opponents that you're right. It's your job to convince the judges that you're right and that you're winning the debate. So I would suggest just don't look at your opponents. It's never really a good look if you don't look at the judges and you stare like this and look at your opponents. And it just kind of also distracts judges from listening to the content of what you have to say. I think that's more or less it about eye contact. Gestures. Okay, so the thing with gestures is that generally your movement, for example, with your arms, with your head and so on, it should enhance what you have to say rather than distract from it. So, for example, I find that particular movements are actually helpful in enhancing your content. So, counting on fingers is one of them. When you count examples, when you count arguments, when you count pieces of rebuttal that you're going to present, doing these motions, it helps also the judges, and it brings judges' attention to you, and it helps the judges to kind of like follow your line of thinking, your line of argumentation, and it also helps you to follow what you have, said, and kind of once you start listing then it helps you follow that list and not, step sideways. Then there's up and down gestures. So these, you can't see me, so like up and then down. What you have oftentimes where you can use them is when you are comparing, for example, I don't know, in a debate, monetary value of something, or like monetary, expenses between, okay, so this is very low, but yet we see that in the opposite situation, or if we use a different kind of technology, then we have, this amount of whatever money, or this amount of like benefits and so on. So kind of to get that contrast and get that kind of, contrast between the two. And then we have sideways gestures. I don't really use them, but I've seen other debaters use them, and I think that they are helpful, and that they actually can enhance, kind of the content, or bring more attention to the content. So sideways gestures, usually I've seen them used during an explanation of logical links. So you have a piece of analysis, and this kind of like the analysis is relatively complex. So you have to go through multiple steps of logical links. And so what I've seen debaters do is that they go, okay, so the first step is this, then the second, then the third, then the fourth, and finally, we come to this. So that this kind of movement also just naturally helps you follow what you are saying, and also kind of brings the attention, and also even helps the judges to follow what you are saying. Because with every, so it doesn't come off as like a single packed thing with like a single piece of analysis, but with this you kind of mark your logical links where it transfers from one to the other. And then natural gestures. So natural gestures is, for example, me constantly moving my arms. I'm the kind of person that talks a lot with my arms, with my hands. And my problem, for example, in debating was that I was talking too much with my hands. I would, do big gestures, and I would do them very often. And at points, it was a bit distracting from what I was saying. And that's also, for example, something that my coach, like Team Latvia's coach in 2018, said to me as well, that like, you're using too much of your arms and it's getting distracting. So like natural movements, you still have to be natural, not everything can really be rehearsed, but there's a line where it is helpful and where it becomes very distracting. Next one. So next one is stance. Yeah. Well, first one is, of course, facing your audience, facing the judges. I've seen young debaters, for some reason, they choose to, like, okay, in my case, the window is here. They choose to almost like face the window and look out the window while they're delivering their speech. Oftentimes, this is just because of nervousness. Sometimes I feel like it's out of habit that you don't really want to, look at the people in front of you. Or you think if you'll notice, their facial expressions or something that they might, or that might intimidate you and so on. And then I've seen some look in the ceiling and some looking like at the wall. And looking at the wall generally is kind of okay if you do it like right behind the judges, but only to a certain extent. Like you still have to come back to the judges. It's still okay as if you pretend that you're talking to a wider audience in the room, and as if you're, looking kind of like past them into the wider audience. But generally, it is better if you look at the judges, and if there is an audience at that audience. If you are feeling a bit nervous, it's okay for you to, look somewhere behind them to the wall, but then you have to come back every once in a while, to really face them and look at them. And then moving with purpose. So for example, when you are debating a motion that is maybe relatively, emotional, or you feel like a specific argument within your speech is quite, maybe emotional, or emotional, then you can enhance that argument and what you are trying to say with different kind of movements. For example, kind of like maybe, stomping your feet once when you are trying to say that like this is not okay, or we should change this because it's causing this and this and so much pain or so much suffering, or so you can definitely use these kind of movements, but they just have to have a certain purpose. Okay, it's raining outside, so I'm going to close my window. And then avoid repetitive movements. So what a lot of debaters do, I think if I can, I'll show. Okay, so what a lot of debaters do is that they sway from one side to the other. And the thing is that this also becomes either distracting, or it just shows that you're like maybe nervous or not convinced about what you're saying, and so on. So it's a movement that is better if you just kind of lose this constant movement. And then there's also like a lot of pacing going on when people, walk like this. I've seen a lot of debaters do that, even the ones that are more experienced, just because they don't really think about their style. Or there's always some hand situation going on. For me, it was a lot of times I would put my hand behind my back for absolutely no reason, and I would just kind of move it back and forth. And that's also kind of a sign, or it seems like a sign of nervousness, and it's not a very ideal kind of stance to put forward. Okay. So I think that's more or less it about stance. Also, guys, if you have any questions throughout what I'm saying, then that's completely fine. And you can just, type them in at any moment and I will respond. But I'm also gonna, leave room for Q&As after I've gone through all of the factors. So next factor is speed. So kind of like the speed that you are talking in throughout your speech. So rushing through your speech, that is something that is very, very common. It's very common in young debaters. Usually the reason is nervousness, and that's understandable, and that's something that, takes practice, and you have to kind of, it just takes practice to get rid of that. But then it is also quite common in more experienced debaters. So for example, if you have a topic or a motion that you feel like you know quite a bit about and you just have a lot of information on, or your prep has gone really, really well, and you have all this information and you want to, put all of it in your speech, then what happens oftentimes is that you start rushing. And you start rushing to the point where your analysis, or where your kind of, your arguments are underanalyzed. And your arguments are underanalyzed, and your pieces of analysis are missing logical links, or your examples are not well explained, or, kind of linked back to the argument or to the debate, or showing the importance, of them to win this debate. So you kind of almost put in all of this information, you rush through it, and then what happens is that the speech in the end isn't that good, just because you've rushed through it. And that is actually quite a big problem in a lot of debaters, and also more experienced ones. And that poses quite a few problems. So I already talked about like that your arguments might be underanalyzed, or your analysis is missing logical links. But then the other thing is that judges oftentimes won't be able to understand you or follow everything that you're trying to say, because with rushing through your speeches, you oftentimes also lose the structure and clear separation of when you're moving to one logical link to the next one, or from one pieces of analysis to the next one. And then, of course, the judges won't catch those important bits of analysis that might be very, very important for you to also, take it over your opposition. And then also the last thing is that you will most likely also lose track of what is important in your debate to win it. So what I've done for myself, if I feel like that, okay, this is probably going to be, one of those debates where I have so much to cover, I have so much rebuttal, I have so much, information or analysis or examples that I want to bring, I write down on my cue cards in capitals, slow down. And then once you're, giving your speech and that just kind of catches your eye, you're automatically speaking a bit slower. And if you're speaking a bit slower, you catch your time, and then you see, okay, I need to be selective about the things that I am talking about. And you lose, for example, a few examples. And that's okay. If you lose a few examples, but you have one example, which is the stronger one, out of 3, if you have 3, and it is well explained, then that gives you more points than 3 examples that you don't show the full kind of correlation with the argument or with the debate itself. Voice modulation. Okay. So I think that there's a possibility generally in most situations to kind of choose the right tone for the motion itself. For example, if it is a motion about economics, technology, then you would choose generally a more maybe calm and analytical tone throughout your speech. But if it's a motion that has to do a lot with the global poor or health or war, then you are more likely to, or like probably it would be preferred if you would show more emotion. You maybe could get angry about certain things, you know, to a limit. Or you may get sad or emotional about certain things. And that's kind of like, I feel like that's important to understand already walking into the debate and understanding the motion and the room and the kind of feeling that the room will have regarding, you know, debating this motion. Then, of course, you have to, you know, vary your volume and pause to accentuate. So, of course, you also do that with volume, you know, certain things that you want to maybe accentuate, you speak loudly. And then you kind of tone it down to where, you know, okay, this is also important, but of course not as important, the thing that I said very loudly. Or you would choose, for example, to pause in certain places to kind of emphasize your last words or the last sentence that you said because you believe that it is very important. I've written down also an example. So for example, you could finish an argument in a loud and aggressive manner, then pause for 2 to 3 seconds, and then start the next argument in a soft and analytical manner. Of course, if you do that only if appropriate and so on, but it oftentimes happens that, for example, an argument that has more social implications, you could be more emotional about, and then an argument that has more, let's say, political or economic implications, you can be more soft and analytical and composed about. Clarity of language. So the first thing is that you want to avoid complex vocabulary, generally, because the thing is that I know that like a lot of debaters do try to, and some debaters probably won't also agree with me, but a lot of debaters do try to use very complex language to, you know, confuse their opponents and so on. And they think that that is a very good strategy kind of to go about. But the thing is that if you use very complex language and then the opponents cannot fully really understand you, then the debate is not going to go well. You might win the debate, but your points definitely aren't going to be the best just because there's going to be less engagement. If you choose to, you know, use very complex vocabulary to the point where it is probably unnecessary and actually brings down the quality of the debate. So be wary and be careful about that. Then explain acronyms if you choose to use them. So for example, acronyms like the UN, USA, NATO, those are not necessary to, you know, explain, like tell their full name, just because they're so often used and everyone really knows them. But for example, if you would say, if in a debate you would use, okay, WTF has, you know, placed the research on this and this, then just, and if you're going to use it multiple times, especially, then just, you know, make sure that you say, okay, World Economic Forum, WTF, WEF. Yeah, WEF. Or for example, if you say PETA, then, you know, first say, okay, People for Ethical Treatment of Animals. And that's just going to clarify things. Then use technical terms only when necessary and definitely explain them. So I think that this is very common in economics and technology debates. So for example, if you would have the if you would use the term, okay, economies of scale, then I feel like it is important for you to explain to the opponent and also to the judges to say, okay, economies of scale, and this means declining average costs as production increases, you know? So just kind of like explain these terms. Or if it's about technology, then if you use the term echo chambers, then, you know, then again, explain, okay, you know, algorithms, marketing, and all that, they use your personal data, then they put it through an algorithm, and then, you know, they send you more and more of the same type of products, political messages, you know, so they market you and they keep you within this one specific echo chamber, which, you know, all of the messages and all of the ads and everything that you get is very, very similar. Okay, so before I wrap it up together, I will wrap it up together with a kind of example of a very bad style, of quite good, of like relatively good style, average style, and then of very good style. But before I go to that and kind of like show what I've talked about and show it more in practice, do you have any questions about what I've said before in the previous slides? And if necessary, I can also go back to that slide and then explain more about anything. This part is always so awkward. It's just silence. We're waiting to see if somebody has questions or not. I think everyone has gone through this awkward stage, especially also with their lecturers at school or university. But, well. Okay. If any of you have questions, then, and if it takes a longer while to type them, then that's okay, because I'll then wrap it up together with the example of what I've talked about throughout this lecture. And meanwhile, you can think of questions if you have any. Okay, so when we went to Zagreb for the World Championships with Team Latvia in 2018, we had a motion. This house supports a school voucher system. So the motion generally is about providing vouchers to every child so they can choose the school that they want to go to, instead of being, you know, assigned a school in the neighborhood that they live in or in the district that they live in. And so the motion has a lot to do with children who come from poor areas having also poor quality education, because that's often the case in most situations. When you come from a poor neighborhood, then within that neighborhood, the quality of education is going to be lower, or quite lower than for children who come from middle income or, you know, like upper class families and live in those kind of neighborhoods. And so, you know, the motion has a lot to do with equality of education and the right to education and the right to choose your education and so on. So the first example, so I'm going to give you kind of like the first, you know, 30 seconds of the first speaker's speech. And I'm going to do it in a bad style, in an average style, and in a quite good style. And, you know, the 30 seconds usually of the first speaker's speech sets the kind of tone and mood of the debate and the tone of the following, you know, of the speeches to follow. So it is quite important to come off in your first 30 seconds with a certain, at least, emotion, or implement a certain style. Okay, so bad style would sound something like this. So this is for the motion, this house supports a school voucher system. Okay, bad style. We believe that everyone deserves equally good education and that everyone should be able to choose their school because education is very important. The current system is very unfair. Okay, so the first thing that I did wrong, that is bad with this style, is that I only read. Second of all, my tone of voice was, it was monotone, so I didn't really change it. I didn't really rush through it, but I was kind of rushing through it. And then also my choice of words in this section did not really, convey anything special or convey anything unique about our case regarding this motion. So, for example, I'm saying that, the system is unfair and that everyone deserves good quality education. That's all I'm saying really in those first seconds. And the problem with this, and this also, of course, intertwines with content because all three criteria are really intertwined and you can't really do an excellent job in content and a really, really bad job in style. That's really not how it happens. But of course, there is some variation between, how good your style is and then how good your content is. But okay, so in this situation, by saying that it's unfair and that we want, good quality education for everyone, I'm not actually, really opposing or saying something that would be in opposition of the other team. Because the other team, in this case, they won't ever argue for we want, bad quality education for children coming from poor areas. They will generally run a counterprop case saying that, okay, of course, we also want to achieve all of these great things that proposition is talking about. We just don't think that the school voucher system is the way to go and it has more, disadvantages and costs than this other, for example, whatever, they have come up with, but this other system or this other solution. Or they may just argue that, the current system is already on its way of being really great, and there may be they bring all of these new developments that are currently being implemented in the existing system. So this was an example of quite bad style. And of course, again, style and content and strategy, all of them really go together. Okay, so this is more an example of quite average style. It is essential that a child and its parents have a choice in what education to receive, as the choice is crucial for the child's development, future prospects, and well-being. Right now, the poor have no other choice than to receive poor quality education, while the rich strive in light of their high quality education. So I maintained more eye contact than I did before. I also used a bit more, differentiation in my tone. Not that much, but a bit. I also did a pause, for example, when I talked about, okay, child's development, future prospects, small pause, and well-being, kind of counting these three as these three important, outcomes for the child and needs for the child. So also generally in the content wise, my choice of words here adds a bit more complexity, kind of in the consequences that schooling has on children's lives, regarding their development and future prospects and so on. But it still doesn't really show how uniquely school vouchers or this ability to choose a school fixes, the problems that are within the current system. Okay, and then the last one, the last kind of example is a very good style. This is actually a fragment of the speech that our first speaker gave during this debate in World Championships. When I go to shop for groceries, I have a wide degree of choice. If my supermarket isn't delivering high enough quality good food at affordable prices, I have the option of going to another supermarket down the street. However, when it comes to schooling, a fundamental human right, the government decides. If that school isn't providing a good enough education that is tailored to me, that's simply too bad. We think it is disgusting that under the status quo, we give people more choice when buying vegetables than when ensuring the future of their children. What do we support? We think that rather than directly providing money to schools, the government should give parents a voucher that could be used to attend any school, public or private. We support caps on maximum fees to ensure that the voucher can be used without parents having to top it up with additional payments. And then it goes on, to like further analysis. So style-wise, let's say, okay, so how is this different from, the previous two? So here in the beginning, I also make clear that the education should be equal, fair, and so on. But with the comparison of, having the ability to choose what kind of groceries you buy, but not having the ability to choose what kind of education you want, and what consequences of receiving good education are, by putting this comparison and putting it in a way in that specific kind of emotion that I put it in, I show how absurd it is that we already aren't following this approach of, having school vouchers, and the children being able to attend any school that they want to attend. And so by giving, by actually really showing that uniquely the choice is the unique kind of aspect here in maintaining good quality education for everyone, we also kind of don't leave the opposition the opportunity to say, okay, yes, we agree, but we can do this, we can achieve this differently. Because if they also agree that, okay, choice is so crucial, and we are completely for the ability to choose a school, then they also will, in the end, agree to a quite large part of our analysis and then of our side of the debate. So in that sense, I already, in the very first 30 seconds, first of all, I set the tone of the debate and how it is horrible, like how horrible the current system is and how absurd it is. And, so I set the tone of the debate. I show how the choice is the unique element in this debate in achieving good quality education for everyone, and so on. And I use it by, and I do it by using emotion, by using pauses, by speaking a bit louder, by speaking a bit slower or faster, at some points, and so on. So I feel like you now can see how style really also affects the way you present your content and how much it can actually add to the content, because it is very different from, having the same words and reading them in a completely different way. But of course, style is not just about how you read those words, but also, the language that you use as well. So for example, the comparison with groceries, it might not really do that much content-wise, but it is a very good style element to use to draw this comparison and to push on these emotions and to show the level of, absurdity that is surrounding the current system. Okay, this was generally it from me. I think I've gone through, all of the factors and generally the style criteria within debates, and also the most common mistakes that I've made and debaters make. New debaters and debaters who have had more experience, and kind of at least try to show you in application how then bad, average, and quite good style looks. So, do you still have any questions that you want to ask? And the awkward silence continues. But okay, guys, so if you don't have any questions, that means that I've, done my job and explained everything very well. But yeah, if you don't have any questions, then I think that I will probably end this lecture. And yeah, and maybe we'll see each other sometime again if I do another one of these. I have, okay. Okay, so of course, generally you talk relatively fast during the debates because you want to put the content out there. But the problem with talking, there's debates generally, yeah, debaters talk fast, and that's how the debate goes. But there's the kind of like debate level fast, and then there's too fast. Okay, so, okay. Normal debate level fast. It is essential that a child and its parents have a choice in what education to receive, as the choice is crucial for child's development, future prospects, and well-being. So this is kind of the normal type of fast that you get in speeches. And then you can get kind of this too fast. It is essential that a child and its parents have a choice in what education to receive, as the choice is crucial for the child's development, future prospects, and well-being. And so if you talk too fast, which happens quite often if you want to, get to your next argument and you see that you only have you only have like 2 minutes left on your clock and so on, then what happens is that, for example, you could hear that by the end of the sentence, I did not do any accentuation towards the three, the development, future prospects, and well-being. And while these aren't, that important when we talk about, those specific words, and like that this is, important for that, this is why education is important for the child. Like this also happens when you are going through your points of rebuttal, when you are going through links, like logical links for your analysis. And if you do it so fast, then you kind of like lose the structure. It makes it for the judge very difficult to follow. And what will happen is that they won't be able to, take notes and actually pinpoint the important pieces of analysis. Not necessarily, actually, because even if I don't know if you guys in your other lectures, or if in, like in debate leader school, I don't know if you've seen or looked at some of the finalists in world championships, like the teams and their speeches. Some of them, yes, talk quite fast, but then they do, they, even when they talk fast, they list everything on either their fingers, they, still use their body language, and they still accentuate even while talking fast. But talking too fast means that you won't accentuate, that you most likely will remain monotone. So if you can, in the sense, okay, so if you talk too fast, you won't have those things. So as long as you have those things, as long as you have variation in your voice, in your speed, in your volume, then you know that you're not talking too fast, because then you can at least still, have these elements of style, have these, style elements in your speech, and you will still, get the points for them. And that also means that they won't be lost. The judges won't be lost in your content. But oftentimes also what my coach has said to me and what judges have said to me and to other debaters is that slow down, because you are putting in too much unnecessary information, or you lose a full 30. For example, once I lost a full 30 seconds of my speech because I was talking too fast, and then and to kind of like get my thoughts together and put the next piece of analysis or argumentation, I would have filler words or filler sounds, which would be so, and I would lose just 30 seconds of my, speech time on just that. And so what you end up doing is, if you talk too fast, you actually don't get that much content out as you would if you would talk a bit slower. And when you talk slower, then you also are more selective about, as I said, about the things about the examples, about the analysis that you want to bring. And that means that you oftentimes then have more time incentive, since you have more time to, explain a piece of analysis. Then you will also probably have more well-developed line of analysis in your speech as well. And that's then going to go, that's going to be a plus for your content and for your style as well, because it's going to be easy to follow, because you're going to vary your voice, your volume, your speed, and so on. And all of those things are extremely, extremely important. They really, really are. The best speakers in the world, they don't rush through their speeches. They speak actually probably as quickly as I am speaking right now, and they don't speak much faster, because they usually successfully use humor in their speeches. They use emotion, they pause to give it, this sort of impact of what they're saying. So if you pause, if you use humor, you can't really talk very fast. Like, you have to, slow it down a bit in order to get those things across. So I would suggest for you to look at kind of the finalist speeches of world championships or of university championships, not university, European championships. And then you'll see what qualifies kind of like good speed of talking, and then what qualifies as very fast. I don't really know if there's a video out there on what qualifies as too fast, but you'll see that, okay, then this is like a normal talking speed, and then this is completely fine if I talk as fast as they do. Yeah. Any more questions? Thank you so much. Yeah, then I guess I'll maybe see you guys some other time. But if not, it was great having you, and I'm also very thankful for the opportunity. I'm thankful to Kotudoma for the opportunity to, talk about this, because I think that style is not talked about enough sometimes. Yeah, so it was great doing this lecture for you guys. See ya.